Michael and Marcus were identical twins who had always been close to each other since the day they were born. People around them often said that it was difficult to tell them apart, not only because they looked exactly the same, but also because they shared the same calm expressions and quiet way of moving through the world. They were both tall, lean, and strong for their age, but they never tried to show it off. Most of the time, they kept to themselves, speaking more to each other than to others, and walking through life with a kind of peaceful confidence. The twins lived with their single mother, a woman who had raised them with strict discipline and endless love. She worked long hours to provide for them, but no matter how tired she was, she made sure they understood the value of respect, humility, and self-control. She often reminded them, real strength isn't about hurting others. It's about knowing how to control yourself. These words became a foundation in their hearts. From an early age, their mother enrolled them in martial arts classes. At first, it was simply a way to keep them busy and give them a safe space to learn discipline. But as the years passed, it became much more than that. Martial arts turned into their passion, their safe haven, and their identity. They trained almost every day, learning not just kicks and punches but balance, patience, and self-discipline. By the time they were teenagers, both Michael and Marcus had earned their black belts, a level that took years of hard work and commitment. Yet, in school, no one knew about this side of them. They didn't brag, they didn't show off, and they never used their skills to intimidate others. To most of their classmates, they were simply quiet boys who didn't cause trouble. Some students thought they were shy, while others assumed they were weak because they rarely stood up to loudmouths or joined in with the louder crowds. The twins, however, didn't mind what people thought. They were content to stay in the background, focusing on their studies, their training, and their small circle of trust, mostly just each other and their mother. Every morning, the twins walked together to school. They often wore simple clothes and kept their heads low, avoiding unnecessary drama. On the surface, they seemed like ordinary boys, but inside they carried the strength of years of training and the wisdom their mother had given them. They knew their worth, and they knew their limits. The last thing they wanted was to draw attention to themselves. Still, life at school wasn't always easy. The football team was popular, and its players often threw their weight around. They had the confidence of athletes who were admired by teachers and students alike, and some of them developed the habit of picking on those who didn't fit in. The twins noticed this, but they always kept their distance. They thought, as long as they stayed quiet and out of the spotlight, no one would bother them. But it wasn't just their silence that made them stand out. The twins had a certain presence that some people didn't understand. They didn't laugh loudly in the hallways or join in gossip. Instead, they walked with calm, measured steps and often shared quiet conversations only they could understand. To the bullies, this was unusual, and unusual often became a target. Despite this, Michael and Marcus carried on. They didn't let the noise of others disturb their peace. After school, while most kids went home to watch TV or play video games, the twins went straight to their martial arts studio. There, under the guidance of their instructor, they pushed their limits every day. They practiced discipline, hours of stances, drills, sparring, and forms. Their teacher often reminded them, "Power is dangerous in the hands of the uncontrolled. You two must always remember that your greatest weapon is restraint." They listened carefully and never forgot those lessons. At home, their mother noticed how the boys carried themselves with dignity. Though they were growing stronger physically, she was proud of the kindness that never left their hearts. They were polite to neighbors, respectful to teachers, and protective of each other. She often said they reminded her of their late father, a man of principle and calm strength. Hearing this always gave them pride and encouraged them to stay on the right path. Even though the twins had everything under control, they were not blind to the dangers of school life. They saw how easily things could change. Rumors spread quickly, and small misunderstandings often led to conflicts. They knew sooner or later someone might try to test them, but they hoped, deep inside, that they would never have to reveal what they were capable of. Their dream was simple: finish school peacefully, support their mother, and maybe one day teach martial arts to others who needed guidance just like they once did. Their classmates never imagined how much strength the quiet, twins carried inside them. In the cafeteria, Michael and Marcus sat at the same corner table every day, eating quietly, sometimes laughing with each other about private jokes. To the bullies, this behavior looked like weakness. They thought the twins were too afraid to mingle, too timid to stand up for themselves. But in reality, it was the opposite. The twins chose peace over chaos, silence over conflict. It was this calmness that would eventually draw the wrong kind of attention. The football players, who often looked for someone to tease, began noticing how the twins never reacted, never argued, and never fought back. To them, this looked like an open invitation. But for now, in this part of their lives, Michael and Marcus continued their routine. School, training, home. They stayed grounded, stayed loyal to each other, and never let the outside world shake their focus. What they didn't know was that their quiet strength would soon be tested in a way that would change how everyone in school saw them. The day was coming when their hidden power, the years of training and discipline, would no longer remain a secret. The weeks passed by, and Michael and Marcus continued living their calm and disciplined routine. They woke up early every morning, helped their mother with small chores at home, and then walked to school side by side. To anyone watching, the twins seemed like ordinary boys who blended into the background. But while they kept a low profile, there was something about them that others couldn't quite understand. In school, the football team was always at the center of attention. They walked through the hallways as if they owned them. Teachers admired them for their athletic achievements. Classmates cheered for them during games, and many students wanted to be around them because of their popularity. But with that popularity came arrogance. A few of the players believed they were untouchable. They were used to people respecting them, even fearing them, and that gave them the courage to push around those who seemed quieter or weaker. At first, the twins had gone unnoticed by the football players. They didn't join clubs, didn't attend parties, and didn't seek attention. But slowly, their calm and distant presence began to irritate some of the bullies. The twins didn't laugh at their jokes, didn't seem impressed by their behavior, and didn't bother trying to be friends with them. To the bullies, this was unusual. They couldn't figure out if Michael and Marcus were shy, or if they thought they were better than everyone else. Either way, the twins became a target in their eyes. It began with small things. One of the players would bump into them in the hallway on purpose, then laugh as if it were a joke. Another time, they made comments while the twins walked past, calling them the silent shadows or mocking them for always sticking together. Michael and Marcus ignored it all. They had been trained for years to control their emotions, and to them, these little attempts at teasing were not worth their energy. But bullies often see silence as weakness. The more the twins ignored them, the more the football players wanted to test them. The bullies enjoyed the reaction of fear they usually got from others, but with Michael and Marcus there was no reaction. No anger, no fear, no nervous laughter. Just calm eyes and quiet steps. This lack of response only made the bullies more determined to break them down. One afternoon during lunch break, the twins sat in their usual corner of the cafeteria, sharing their food and talking softly to each other. The football players entered with their usual loud voices, laughing and drawing attention. After a while, one of them pointed toward the twins' table. "Look at those two," he said loud enough for others to hear. "Always hiding in the corner. Do they ever talk to anyone else?" His friends laughed, and soon the whole group turned their attention toward Michael and Marcus. The twins didn't respond. They continued eating, but they could feel the eyes of the bullies on them. Finally, one of the players walked over and stood by their table. He leaned down and said mockingly, "Hey, do you guys even know how to smile? Or do you just sit here, staring at each other all day?" His friends laughed from across the room. Michael and Marcus glanced at each other, then calmly looked back at their food. They didn't give him the reaction he wanted. That silence irritated him. He slapped the table lightly, causing a small noise, and said, "I'm talking to you." Still, the twins didn't speak. They just looked at him with calm expressions that showed neither fear nor anger. It was a look that confused him. After a moment, he gave up and walked back to his group, shaking his head. But the seed of challenge had been planted. From that day on, the football players made it a point to bother the twins whenever they got the chance. In the locker room, they mocked the way the twins dressed. In the hallways, they made jokes about how quiet they were. Sometimes they would shout across the cafeteria just to see if the twins would react. But no matter what was said, Michael and Marcus stayed calm. However, what the bullies didn't know was that beneath that calmness was not weakness, but strength. The twins had been taught never to start a fight, but also never to allow themselves to be disrespected beyond a certain point. They carried with them the lessons of their martial arts training, which told them that patience was powerful, but every person had limits. The tension at school began to grow. Other students noticed how the football players kept targeting the twins, and some started whispering about it. Some felt sorry for Michael and Marcus, thinking they were too timid to stand up for themselves. Others believed it was only a matter of time before the twins got into serious trouble with the bullies. What no one realized was that the twins were not afraid. They were simply waiting, watching, and deciding how long they could allow things to continue. One Friday afternoon after gym class, the situation escalated. The twins were in the locker room, quietly putting their things away, when a group of football players walked in. They surrounded the twins' lockers, laughing and making comments. One of them pushed Marcus lightly on the shoulder and said, "You guys think you're too good for everyone, don't you?" Marcus stayed still, looking at his brother. Michael stepped forward slightly, placing his hand on his brother's shoulder as if to say, "Stay calm." But the bullies were not satisfied. They wanted more. Another player smirked and said, "Maybe we should show them how this school really works." The group laughed. One of them even suggested they should challenge the twins after school to teach them a lesson in front of everyone. The twins said nothing. They gathered their belongings, walked past the group, and left the locker room without a word. Their silence once again made the bullies feel as if they had won, but in reality, Michael and Marcus were simply choosing not to fight in that moment. Word about the challenge spread quickly through the school. By the end of the day, students were whispering about it in the hallways. "The football team is going to mess with the twins after school," some said. "Those quiet guys don't stand a chance." Others were curious. They wondered if maybe the twins were hiding something, because no one could understand why they never got angry. As the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms, the air was filled with anticipation. The bullies were confident, ready to humiliate the twins in front of a crowd. The twins, however, walked side by side as they always did, calm and steady, their expressions unreadable. Deep inside, they both knew that a moment was coming when they might have no choice but to reveal the truth about who they were and what they had trained for all these years. The school day felt unusually long for Michael and Marcus. As the minutes ticked by, they could sense the atmosphere changing around them. Everywhere they went, they noticed whispers, sideways glances, and groups of students quietly pointing in their direction. Word about the football players' threat had spread like wildfire. By lunchtime, almost the entire school knew that the twins were going to be tested after classes ended. The twins, however, behaved as if nothing unusual was happening. They sat in their corner of the cafeteria, eating their food calmly and exchanging a few quiet words between them. Michael spoke softly. "They are expecting a reaction." Marcus nodded, replying in the same calm tone. "That's what they want, but we won't give it." Both brothers knew that the situation was building towards something they couldn't avoid forever, but they were determined not to lose their control. Around them, other students whispered. Some pitied the twins, thinking they were too timid to defend themselves. Others looked forward to the afternoon, almost excited to watch what they thought would be an easy humiliation. A few, however, had begun to wonder if there was more to Michael and Marcus than what met the eye. Their calmness didn't look like fear. It looked like quiet confidence. In the final class of the day, the tension was heavy. The football players sat with smug expressions, whispering and laughing among themselves, throwing glances toward the twins. Michael and Marcus ignored it all, focused on their work until the bell rang. As the last sound of the school bell echoed through the hallways, students rushed outside, buzzing with excitement. A large crowd had already started gathering near the edge of the school grounds, waiting for the showdown. The football players were the last to leave the classroom, walking slowly and confidently, as if they were preparing for a victory parade. They had no doubt the twins would fold under pressure. To them, Michael and Marcus were just quiet boys who had never stood up to anyone. What could they possibly do against the strongest athletes in school? The twins walked out together, side by side as always. Their pace was calm, their faces unreadable. They didn't speak to anyone, nor did they acknowledge the crowd forming outside. To them, this was just another moment of life they had to face with patience and dignity. But inside, both brothers could feel the growing weight of the situation. They had trained for years not to use their skills recklessly, yet here they were, being forced into a corner. When they reached the schoolyard, the scene was already set. A circle of students had formed, buzzing with chatter and anticipation. The football players stood in the middle, waiting with confident smirks. One of them called out, "There they are, the silent shadows finally showed up." The crowd laughed. Michael and Marcus exchanged a glance. Without saying a word, they stepped into the circle. Their calm expressions stood in sharp contrast to the loud energy around them. One of the players stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "We've had enough of your attitude," he said, though in truth the twins had never shown any. "You walk around here like you're too good for everyone. Today, we'll show you where you really stand." The crowd erupted in cheers and whistles, waiting for the twins to respond. But Michael and Marcus remained silent. Their eyes were steady, their breathing calm. They were not afraid, nor were they angry. They were simply waiting. Another player stepped forward, pointing at them. "What's the matter? Too scared to talk? Or do you think you're too cool for words?" He nudged Marcus with his shoulder, expecting a reaction. Marcus simply stood still, his calmness unshaken. The crowd grew restless. Students were shouting, "Come on, do something." The football players were enjoying the attention, but they were also growing frustrated. They had expected fear, begging, or at least nervousness. Instead, they saw two brothers who looked completely composed, as though none of this bothered them. One of the players finally raised his voice. "Listen, if you don't fight back, we'll make you." He shoved Michael lightly, trying to provoke him still. Michael only stepped back slightly, his eyes never leaving the boy's face. Inside, Michael remembered his mother's words. Real strength is knowing when to hold back. But he also knew something else. Martial arts had taught him that while patience was important, there came a time when standing firm was the only option left. He could sense that the bullies were pushing closer and closer to that line. The crowd grew louder, chanting and cheering as if this were a scheduled match. The football players puffed up their chests, feeding on the energy. Finally, one of them smirked and said, "After school today, we're going to finish this properly. Out back where everyone can watch, don't be cowards." The twins didn't reply. They simply walked away, side by side, leaving the circle of noise behind them. The crowd groaned in disappointment, thinking the twins had backed down. The football players laughed and shouted insults at their retreating figures. But what no one realized was that Michael and Marcus weren't running away. They were simply waiting for the right time, the right place. As they walked home that evening, the brothers spoke quietly. Marcus broke the silence first. "They won't stop, Michael, you know that." Michael nodded. "Yes, they think silence means weakness, but we know better." For a moment, they walked in silence again, the sound of their footsteps filling the evening air. Then Michael added, "We may have to show them, not to hurt them, but to make them understand." Marcus agreed. "If they want to see, then we'll show them, but only enough to open their eyes." That night, they trained in their small practice space at home. They didn't talk about the bullies again, but both knew what was coming. They practiced with focus, their movements sharp and precise, their balance steady. Every kick, every block, every strike was a reminder of the years of discipline they had put into their training. The next day at school, the whispers grew louder. Everyone was talking about what would happen after classes. Students were excited, almost treating it like a show they couldn't miss. The football players walked through the halls with smug grins, enjoying the attention. They were confident that the twins would finally be humiliated. But Michael and Marcus remained the same as always. Calm, quiet, and steady. They went through, their day as if nothing unusual was happening. Yet deep inside, they were ready. They didn't seek the conflict, but they knew it was waiting for them. And when it came, they would no longer be able to hide who they really were. The stage was set, and the entire school was waiting. The twins' secret was on the edge of being revealed, though no one yet had any idea what was truly coming. The day that everyone had been waiting for finally arrived. From the very beginning of the morning, there was a strange buzz in the school air. Students whispered in the hallways, exchanged eager glances, and even skipped their usual routines, just to talk about the event that was expected after school. The story had grown larger than life. What had started as a simple threat in the locker room was now being treated like the biggest showdown in the school's history. Michael and Marcus walked into the building together as they always did. Their steps were calm and measured, their faces unreadable. They carried their books, greeted a few teachers politely, and quietly went about their day. To them, it was just another morning. But around them, the entire school seemed to be buzzing, like a hive preparing for something explosive. The football players walked through the hallways like champions before a big game. They slapped hands with classmates, accepted words of encouragement, and promised that the quiet twins were finally going to be put in their place. To them, it wasn't just about power, it was about reputation. They wanted to show that no one could resist them, not even the two brothers who always stayed calm and silent. By the time the last class ended, the air was thick with tension. Students rushed out of their classrooms and streamed toward the back of the school, the place where the showdown had been planned. It was an open area near the field, a spot hidden from teachers' eyes but big enough for a crowd to gather. By the time Michael and Marcus stepped outside, nearly the entire school was already waiting there. The football players stood at the center, puffed up with confidence. The crowd cheered as the twins approached. "There they are!" someone shouted. "The silent shadows!" another yelled, and laughter spread. Michael and Marcus walked forward together. Their calmness stood out sharply against the noisy, excited atmosphere. They didn't look nervous, nor did they look angry. Their faces carried the same quiet strength they had always shown. To the bullies, this calmness looked like weakness. To the few who were observant, it looked like something else, something steady and controlled. One of the football players stepped forward, smirking. "So, you actually showed up. Good, now we can settle this." He shoved Marcus lightly on, the shoulder waiting for a reaction. Marcus didn't move. Michael stepped a little closer, his eyes calm but watchful. The crowd began chanting, urging something to happen. "Come on, do it!" they yelled. The football players, feeding on the energy, grew bolder. Another player stepped in, laughing. "You two think you're tough just because you stay quiet? Let's see what you've got." He pushed Michael, this time harder than before. For a brief moment, the twins stayed still. They had promised themselves they would not be the ones to start a fight. They believed in patience and restraint in the teachings of their martial arts. But the bullies had crossed the line. They were no longer simply mocking, it had become physical. And at that moment, Michael and Marcus silently agreed it was time to respond. The first shove came again, this time harder, aimed at Marcus. But before the bully's hand could land fully, Marcus shifted his weight, stepping aside smoothly. His movement was quick but calm, as though he had been waiting for it. The bully stumbled forward, confused, while Marcus stood still, his eyes steady. The crowd gasped. They hadn't expected the twins to move with such precision. Another football player, irritated by the reaction, rushed forward to grab Michael. But Michael's training came alive in an instant. With a swift but controlled motion, he redirected the boy's arm and stepped aside, causing the bully to lose balance and fall to the ground harmlessly. The crowd erupted in shock. The bullies weren't laughing anymore. Their smirks faded as confusion crept across their faces. The twins hadn't thrown a single punch, yet two football players had already been stopped effortlessly. The leader of the group growled, stepping forward. "Enough games!" He lunged at Marcus, trying to tackle him. But Marcus moved with the speed and accuracy of years of training. In one smooth motion, he sidestepped, gently hooked the boy's arm and guided him down with a technique that looked almost effortless. The bully landed on the ground, not hurt, but completely disoriented. The crowd roared. What they were witnessing didn't look like luck. It looked like skill, precise, sharp, and disciplined skill. Michael and Marcus stood side by side again, their expressions calm, their breathing steady. They hadn't raised their voices, they hadn't shown anger, yet their message was clear. They were not weak. They were not timid. They were simply choosing not to fight until they had no choice. The football players hesitated now. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do. They had always relied on their strength, their size, and their reputation to intimidate others. But against the twins, none of that mattered. Their power was being dismantled not with fists of anger but with movements of discipline. Still, pride pushed them forward. Another player rushed at Michael, swinging wildly. Michael's eyes sharpened, his body reacting instinctively. He blocked the strike with precision, stepped aside, and used the boy's own momentum to guide him off balance. The bully stumbled, nearly falling into the crowd, and was caught by his friends. The crowd gasped again, some cheering, some too stunned to speak. By now, whispers spread quickly through the crowd. "They're trained. Did you see that move? They know martial arts." Shock turned into awe as students realized the truth. Michael and Marcus weren't just quiet boys. They were black belts, trained fighters who had been hiding their true strength all along. The football players stood frozen, breathing heavily, their confidence slipping away. They had come expecting to humiliate the twins, but instead, they were the ones humiliated. And the twins had done it without throwing a single harsh strike. Michael finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "We didn't want this. We never asked for it, but we won't be disrespected." His words were not loud, but in the sudden silence of the crowd they rang clear. Marcus added quietly, "Strength isn't about hurting others. It's about knowing when to stop. Remember that." The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, the whispers began again. But this time they weren't mocking. They were filled with respect, with admiration, even with disbelief. Students looked at the twins with new eyes. The quiet boys were not weak at all. They were powerful, disciplined, and controlled in a way no one else at the school could match. The football players, red-faced and defeated, backed away. They had no clever words left, no more strength to show off. For the first time, they were the ones being stared at, not as heroes, but as boys who had underestimated the wrong people. Michael and Marcus turned away from the center of the circle. Together they walked out of the crowd, their heads held high but their steps calm and measured. They hadn't come to show off and they hadn't come to fight. They had only come to protect their dignity. The crowd parted silently as they passed. Some students clapped quietly, others just stared in awe. For the first time, everyone realized that true strength didn't always come with loud words or heavy fists. Sometimes it came in silence, discipline, and restraint. After the surprising and tense events in the schoolyard, the atmosphere in the school changed completely. The football players were quiet now, their usual arrogance replaced with confusion and unease. They had underestimated Michael and Marcus, and the lesson had been clear. Strength was not about shouting or showing off, but about control, skill, and discipline. The crowd of students slowly began to disperse, but everyone carried a sense of awe. Whispers of admiration followed the twins everywhere they went. "Did you see that?" someone asked. "They didn't even hit them hard, but they stopped the whole football team." Others nodded, clearly impressed. The quiet boys who had always been overlooked were now being seen for who they truly were. Michael and Marcus walked together back to their usual corner in the cafeteria. They were calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To them, it was simply another day, another challenge met with patience and control. They didn't boast, they didn't show off, and they didn't feel the need to prove themselves further. They had done what was necessary, and nothing more. Throughout the following days, the twins' reputation at school transformed. Students, who once ignored them now treated them with respect. Even those who had been indifferent or dismissive started looking at them differently. Teachers noticed the change too, observing how the twins handled themselves with maturity and quiet confidence. Their story became an example of how discipline and skill, combined with patience, could earn respect without aggression. The football players, on the other hand, learned a valuable lesson. They realized that arrogance and bullying did not guarantee power. True strength, they now understood, was not measured by size, loudness, or popularity. It was measured by restraint, intelligence, and control. Slowly, some of the players approached the twins with apologies. "We didn't know," one of them admitted quietly. "We didn't realize you were trained." Michael and Marcus listened without anger. They accepted the apology, showing that forgiveness was another form of strength. The twins also noticed a subtle change in the school culture. Students who had once been afraid to speak up against bullying now felt inspired. They saw that being quiet or calm did not mean being weak, and that standing up for oneself could be done without hurting others. Michael and Marcus became role models not through loud words or dramatic gestures, but through their actions and restraint. Outside of school, life returned to its normal rhythm. The twins continued their martial arts training, honing their skills with dedication. Their mother noticed a subtle confidence in their demeanor, one that was stronger than before but still humble. She reminded them, as she had always done, that the greatest power came with responsibility, and that they had handled their challenge with integrity. The twins nodded, understanding the weight of her words. In their classes, the twins were no longer invisible. Teachers respected their focus and calm, students admired their courage and skill, and even those who once mocked them had learned to think twice. The twins didn't crave attention, but they realized that their actions had inspired others. Their story became a quiet legend at school, a reminder that patience, discipline, and integrity often speak louder than words or force. At home, Michael and Marcus reflected on the events with their mother. She listened patiently as they described what had happened, and she smiled with pride. "You handled yourselves with wisdom," she said. "You didn't let anger control you, and you protected yourselves without unnecessary harm. That is true strength." The twins felt proud, not because they had defeated anyone, but because they had stayed true to their principles. The incident also brought the twins closer together. They had always been inseparable, but facing this challenge made their bond even stronger. They understood each other's thoughts and feelings without speaking, and their silent support became a source of reassurance. They knew that together they could face any challenge life put in front of them. In the weeks and months that followed, the twins' story continued to ripple through the school. Younger students asked questions about martial arts and discipline. Teachers used the story as an example in discussions about respect, patience, and handling conflict. Even the football team began to adopt a more thoughtful approach, learning to balance confidence with humility. The twins themselves remained grounded. They continued their routine, school, training, home, without seeking attention. But now they carried a quiet recognition from their peers. They had proven that strength was not about showing off or hurting others. It was about knowing one's own power and using it wisely. Their mother often watched them with quiet satisfaction. She had always believed in their potential, and now the world was beginning to see it too. She reminded them, as she had throughout their lives, that the most important lesson was not the fight itself, but how they had conducted themselves. "You can always be strong," she said, "but being wise with that strength is what makes a person truly remarkable." As the school year progressed, Michael and Marcus continued to live their lives with the same calm dedication that had always defined them. They attended classes, trained in martial arts, and supported their mother in every way they could. But now, they carried with them the knowledge that respect was earned not through loud words or aggression, but through skill, patience, and integrity. Even the bullies who had once targeted them learned to behave differently. Some of them eventually joined the twins' martial arts classes, inspired by their discipline and humility. Others simply moved on, carrying with them the lesson that power without control leads to failure. The twins never held grudges. They had only wanted to stand up for themselves while remaining true to their values. By the end of the school year, Michael and Marcus had become more than just quiet students. They had become symbols of courage, discipline, and quiet strength. Their story was told in classrooms, shared among friends, and remembered long after the incident in the schoolyard. They had faced a challenge that could have ended badly, yet they turned it into a lesson for everyone around them. And through it all, the twins remained the same humble, disciplined, and kind individuals they had always been. They didn't seek glory, but they had earned respect. They didn't crave attention, but their actions had inspired others. Most importantly, they had stayed true to themselves, proving that real strength comes not from intimidation or anger, but from control, patience, and integrity. Michael and Marcus had learned a simple but powerful truth. Life would always have challenges, but how one faces them defines who they are. By the time they graduated, they were admired not just for their skills, but for their character. And long after leaving the school, their story continued to inspire others, reminding everyone that courage and respect are always stronger than fear and arrogance. The twins walked through life side by side, their bond unbreakable, their hearts steady, and their minds focused. They had faced adversity, revealed their hidden strength, and earned a place in the hearts of their peers, not through aggression, but through wisdom and courage. They knew the lesson they had learned would stay with them forever. True power is measured not by how hard you can hit, but by how wisely you choose to act.